Hello and welcome to the Career Success Podcast. I'm Jason Connolly. If you're a regular listener, it's great to have you back. But if you're new, welcome to the show. In this series every week, we speak to the biggest names in business all across the globe. We talk about their career stories, the lessons learned, how they overcome challenges, and what success habits they practice. If you have a passion for business, then this is the podcast for you. In this episode, I'm delighted to be joined by Jeff Wald from Manhattan in the US. Jeff is the founder of Work Market, an enterprise software platform that enables companies to manage freelancers. This company was acquired by ADP. Jeff has founded several other technology companies, including Spinback, a social sharing platform eventually purchased by Salesforce.com. Jeff is an active angel investor and startup advisor, as well as serving on numerous public and private boards of directors. Jeff is the author of the Amazon bestseller, The End of Jobs, The Rise of On-Demand Workers and Agile Corporations. Jeff, it's an absolute delight to have you on this episode. Thanks for joining me.
Jason, it is great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Now, your book, it's really interesting, but before we kind of come on to the end of jobs and the rise of on-demand workers and agile corporations, tell us about you, Jeff, and give us a whistle-stop tour of your career.
Sure. Well, I started my career in finance, working for JP Morgan as a little M&A banker, and eventually moved my way to venture capital, working for an Israeli venture firm called Glenrock, which was an amazing experience and got me very enamored with entrepreneurship. So I left there to start my first company. It failed miserably and left me basically broke. It's part of the startup world that a lot of people don't talk about, but it is
Mm.
a very real and very high probability outcome is that you're going to fail. And you pick yourself up and dust yourself off. The next company I started was a incarnation of that first company, and that was Spinback that eventually got sold to Salesforce. And various other twists and turns, which led to the founding of Work Market, which, as you mentioned, was purchased by ADP. And I actually just left ADP as my lockup period ended, and now I'm thinking about startup number five.
Wow. And what was it about? I don't want to kind of focus on failures here, but what was it that didn't work out the first time, but then did work out the second time?
Well, my two co-founders sued each other the first time, and the second time I decided not to bring the same team back together.
Oh,
So,
okay. Seems quite logical then.
yeah.
That makes sense. And kind of you've obviously started these companies. You've had tremendous success. Obviously, I'm sure there's been so many challenges and tribulations along the way. But what made you kind of sell the companies on? Why did you not kind of stick around for the long term?
It's a really good question, Jason. I mean, when you start these companies, you're always starting them with an exit in mind. Now, that exit could be a public offering, it could be, running it for some time, but we're not building family businesses. If you're taking venture capital and you're taking outside investors' money, you have a fiduciary responsibility to produce a return for them. And so, we raised a lot of venture in each of the different things that I did. For Work Market, we raised almost 70 million in venture from SoftBank, Union Square Ventures, and a few others. And we had to deliver a return for them. So when ADP came knocking, we were very, very excited to join ADP as a part of their family for my team at Work Market, and very excited to be able to deliver a return for our investors in Work Market.
And your exits from these companies, did it always kind of work out to the plan at the beginning, or did the exit from the companies kind of did it all the goalposts change once it started up? How sort of to the plan did these exits stick?
There's maybe no better quote out there than the Mike Tyson. Everyone's got a plan until you get punched in the face.
Right. Okay.
And in startup land, you get punched in the face, figuratively, mind you, again and again. And so, look, I will say that of the many responsibilities of a company founder, one is to always have your eye on that exit, where you want to take this company, where you want to lead it, and who might the buyers be. And so, over Work Market's life as an independent company, which is about 7.5 years, I spent a lot of time, Jason, getting to know the heads of corp dev at the different companies that I thought may buy us. And to show you how wrong I was, I never reached out to ADP, never had a conversation with them. And so we got to know each other because through various other circumstances, nothing to do with my thoughts as, oh, ADP might buy us one day.
What did you learn from the first kind of sale to ADP that you took with you to the second one? Because everyone's heard of Salesforce.com.
Each company that you build, you pick up so many things. I will tell you the things that I've learned the most in
Hmm.
this journey were the things that I got to learn while at ADP. I didn't actually go to Salesforce after Spinback was purchased. And so for me, getting a chance to watch as one of the largest, most well-run companies on the planet. And people can say a lot of things about ADP, but ADP dots its I's and crosses its T's. I mean, they know exactly what they're doing, and they're doing it at a scale at which very few companies can even imagine, let alone operate at. And so for me as an entrepreneur, getting to spend 2.5 years as a part of their senior leadership team was such an amazing gift. Watching as this incredibly well run, incredibly large global behemoth fixed all the things that we had built within work market, fixed them not because they were broken, but fixed them for scale. And getting a chance to watch as we thought about things in the millions, they're thinking about things in the trillions.
That's really interesting. I imagine that was a great time for you, and can't imagine the amount of tools that must equip you with to kind of go on from there. I want to delve straight into the book, Jeff, because it's very topical and it's really interesting. So it's. Say at the beginning, like I did in the intro, it's an Amazon best seller. The End of Jobs, the Rise of On-Demand Workers and Agile Corporations. And just from reading some of the press pack before, as robots rise, we are faced with the end of jobs, but not in the way you might think. Now, I could read on, Jeff, but I'm going to let you kind of give us an overview of what the book is all about.
Well, the book is about using history, using data, and using how companies actually engage workers in order to produce a thoughtful version or prediction of how the world of work may evolve. There are just too many people out there, Jason, that like to say outlandish things and like to make outlandish predictions that make for good sound bites, but that aren't rooted in history, data, or how companies actually engage workers. And I think in the world of work, that's super dangerous. You have people, communities, companies, leaders that are thinking about and planning for their future. And if they're not given the right frameworks to think about the future, I get a little concerned that poor decisions might be made by families, by companies, by policymakers. And so the book is an attempt to use this framework of history, data, and how companies actually engage workers to make some thoughtful predictions about the future.
And what was the what inspired you to write this book? It's not no it's no mean feat to write a book in the first place, but where did the inspiration
Oh
come from?
man, writing a book sucks. It just sucks. I mean, it took me like 7 years to write this thing. Now, granted, it wasn't my full-time job, right? I was building a company and then running it within ADP, but still, it is really, really challenging. But I'll tell you what initially led me to start writing it was just frustration and annoyance. I had the opportunity to speak in at many conferences and be on many panels, and you're sitting with these other, quote unquote experts and quote unquote thought leaders, and they would make statements that I would just be like, "I'm sorry, what data are you using to support that statement?" And they'd say, well, nothing. It's just that's where I think the world's going." I'm like, "Okay, well, I think that's ridiculous that you would open your mouth with that statement." Or someone would say, this happened just recently. Somebody said, "Oh, I think half the workforce is going to be remote post pandemic." And I said, "Okay, well, how do you juxtapose that against the fact that only 42% of the workforce in the United States, and it's very similar in most other industrialized countries, how do you juxtapose that with the fact that 42% of people can work remotely, 58% can't?" And the guy that said it said, "Oh, well, I didn't know that." I said, "Well, shouldn't you know it? Shouldn't you
Mm.
know those facts? Shouldn't you know the data before you make a prediction?" And so all that frustration kind of led me to write a book using history, data, and how companies actually engage workers to make predictions.
Because the book talks about the world has witnessed a three-step functions in technological change. Now, this is a bit of a mouthful, but I'm going to attempt it
Mhm,
anyway, Jeff. Electrification, computerization, and mechanicization.
mhm,
And it's interesting because it's talking about with technological breakthroughs and how that relationship has kind of worked with workers in companies, it seems to be changing at a drastic pace. I don't, Jeff, I'm not going to quote data I don't know, but I know that as technology keeps advancing, it's getting quicker and quicker and quicker and quicker.
Sure.
So companies need to be very, very much kind of wide awake to this. But from what you're saying, it sounds like still a lot of people are sticking their finger in the air and hoping for the best.
Well, I'll say this. When we look at these previous industrial revolutions, I think it's super important to do that because we're in what many people are calling the fourth industrial revolution. And it's important to understand we've been here before. We've had a situation where a new technology, for us now, this is robots and AI, so drastically increases productivity that the fundamental supply and demand balance between workers and companies changes. And that's happened before. It's happened, as you articulated, with mechanization, with electrification, with computerization. So, how did companies, workers, and society react when all of a sudden we needed a lot fewer workers? And did we end up with technological unemployment? No. How did we end up, with tremendous dislocation? Yes. But was it in the end a net benefit for society? The answer is yes. And so what can we learn from history about these previous technological innovations, these previous industrial revolutions that'll inform us about what we're going through now? And I look, you started to articulate some of the reasons it's different. One of my other
Mm,
favorite quotes is the five most dangerous words in business are this time it is different because it's
mm.
almost never different. But there are reasons to think that it's going to be somewhat different, at least, of course. And you articulated one of them, which is the speed at which this change will occur. This will occur much faster.
And
But do I think that we're in for a very different conclusion? No, I don't.
okay, and as we enter this fourth great leap forward in technology, robots and AI, do you think that looks like, or what data have you got that kind of indicates what the world is going to look like? And I know your book does indeed talk about, well, it has essays on the world of work in 2040. So I'm assuming this is from a very well founded place, Jeff.
Well, the essays are from a very well-founded place because they come from people much smarter than me. And so, back to our point about writing a book is difficult. My publisher kept saying, "You don't have enough. You need to repeat everything." I'm like, I don't like to repeat things.
Mm,
And so I came up with the idea to get some of the men and women who I had interviewed for the book, and there were hundreds of them, thought leaders and heads of HR and government officials, to get them to write what they viewed the world of work, how it might unfold by 2040. And so their contributions really are quite fantastic and are easily my favorite part of the book.
and I appreciate you're not going to be able to unpack this all, but what should we be expecting from the next kind of 10 years in the workplace, and what trends should we be looking out for?
Well, here's the important thing to note. There are three almost uninterrupted trends over the last 200 years in the world of work. One is almost every single year, 2020 was one of the exception years, we produce more jobs globally. More jobs are created every single year, save for a few anomalies. We work fewer and fewer hours, again, almost uninterrupted over 200 years. And we have, third trend, a higher standard of living. I haven't seen any data that tells me that those trends will suddenly be interrupted. And so
Hmm.
when I think about the next 10 years or 20 years, I think about, will there be dislocation? Of course. Will some industries, some job functions across industries, will they be displaced by automation, robots and AI? Of course they will. Will we create more jobs? Of course we will. The question and the challenge, not only for today, but when we look in history, but the challenge is how do you move the workers from the jobs, the industries, and sometimes the geographies where there is dislocation, where there is job compression? How do we move them to the places where jobs are growing? Because that has been the big challenge that society has gone through the previous industrial revolutions. And I lament that it might be a challenge that we face in this one as well.
I don't want to kind of go into kind of geopolitics and things like that, but do you think that certain nations are really going to benefit and the gap between rich and poor is going to grow ever wider?
I will say one of the big concerns I have is the
Mm.
exacerbation of existing gaps in society. And those gaps might be racial, they might be geographic within countries, certainly geographic across countries. And so that is a big concern
Okay.
that we will exacerbate those gaps. And, when you think about them and you think about the ability to train a workforce, the ability to be flexible, those are the kind of hallmarks that will separate geographies, whether they're inside a country or country to country, the kind of winners versus the losers on this. And unfortunately, for a lot of places, the winners are going to be the ones that have historically been the winners.
Interesting. And on the front of the book, it's very, very striking. I think if you went into a bookshop, you would definitely notice this book. It has on a key on a keyboard RIP. What's the takeaway from that button on the front of the book?
Well, there are two takeaways. One is sensationalism sells, which is an unfortunate hallmark of our society. And so my publisher's like,
Right.
"Oh, we got to put an RIP." I'm like, "Well, that's kind of misleading." They're like, "I don't know, it'll sell." I'm like, "All right, well, whatever." Look, I did title the book The End of Jobs. And people intuit that to mean that jobs themselves are going to go. And I hope I've made clear my point here that I
Mm,
don't think jobs will go. What I am talking about is the end of the 9 to 5, one office, one manager job. That job, we can say rest in peace to. That job is dying and is going. And COVID certainly accelerated that trend. The idea that we go to an office, clearly, that's been a part of the conversation over the last,
mm,
16 months.
yeah.
Remote work is coming more to the fore. The idea that we work for one company for an extended period of time, of course, that idea has become very antiquated. We are moving, Jason, to what I would qualify as fluid, team-based, work from anywhere, always on jobs. And that's the new job. And the old job, that 9 to 5, one office, one manager job, that job is dying, and thus the end of jobs as we've known them over the last 60 years.
So, do you think that there's for young people now that there's more opportunity than there say was 20 years ago when someone left school? Because it seems like a complex job landscape to navigate.
Well, it would depend on that person's skills
Mm,
and whether those individuals have been trained in the skills that are in demand. If you are trained in the skills that are in demand, you will have a tremendously wonderful career. And this goes not just for people leaving university, but people in their career journey. I will tell you there's a phrase that some people are like, "Oh God, it's being said too much." And I'm going to tell you, it's not being said nearly enough, and that is that everyone's got to be a lifelong learner.
mm,
The time in which a skill abates, in which it is no longer monetizable, used to be 30 years, right? You could go to university or a trade school or an apprenticeship,
sure.
you could build a skill, and you can monetize that over your career. And that's it. You would never need to do any continuing education. That is not the case anymore. And so, whether it is people that are coming out of university or people that have been a job for 20 or 30 years, you need to be a lifelong learner and you need to make sure that your skills are still the skills that are in demand.
Self development, it used to be kind of a bit of a title that people would think, oh, okay, self development, there is a market for that. But I've always said that you never stop developing. And I think that really puts the point in case there. What do you hope? Obviously, we've discussed quite a few different aspects of the book, but what do you hope are the biggest takeaways that you want people to take from the book?
Well, I hope that people read it and take away that this is very complicated. There are no simple solutions. Anytime you hear any kind of simplistic answer in regards to the world of work, you should say, all right, what's your data? Anytime you hear that simple conclusion of, oh, this new technology exists, therefore this job's going to go, you should say, okay, where's your data? Because that almost never happens. And so I hope people kind of bring a critical thinking lens once they've read the book to any discussion they have. I hope it equips them with the data to engage in the discussion. And I hope that they realize that technological change in the world of work happens slowly. that we always end up with more jobs and that retraining is going to be the most important challenge that we have.
Really interesting. What's kind of been the reaction since the book was published? Has anything kind of surprised you that's happened since the book arrived for the world to read?
Well, the book's been out for a little over a year, and so the biggest surprise was obviously the pandemic, and everyone saying, well, now that there's a pandemic, how do you change your point of view? Which is, I don't change my point of
Uh,
view, right? The point of the book is that we have to look at these things over a long period of time. We have to look at the data. And so at the beginning of the pandemic, people would say, well, how has COVID changed work? And I would say, okay, well, I don't have the data yet. I'm not really willing to draw any conclusions. I can call out some conclusions that other people have drawn because they fly in the face of all the data that we do have, like our friend that predicted 50% of the workforce would work remote. There is a 0% chance of that occurring. But until we see the data patterns over a few quarters post COVID, and God willing, we'll get to post COVID soon, we just don't know. But COVID has certainly been the biggest surprise.
and I think it's taken us all by surprise. And I imagine in some ways it's kind of accelerated a lot of kind of technology anyway. I imagine it's been, if anything, kind of a positive for what a lot of companies are trying to do. And maybe companies that aren't forward thinking enough or aren't embracing technology and data, they certainly are now, if not before.
Jason, I think that's 100% correct. We certainly have seen remote work, and we have a lot of data on remote work, and being able to say that that has certainly sped up 10 to maybe 15 years in advance of where we would have been without the pandemic, in terms of people being able to work outside their offices. When you think about on-demand labor, when you think about the adoptions of new technologies around automation, it is highly possible that it is sped it up, but we just don't have the data on that yet. But remote work, we actually do have a lot of data on.
Now, what I found really interesting, the Future of Work Prize. Tell us about that, Jeff.
Well, I'll tell you this, again, writing a book is really hard. And so when my publisher said you need more pages, we came up with this idea to get these thought leaders. I asked about 50 people if they would consider writing a piece. I think it was about 40 came back and said that they would. They would write a short essay, about 2,500 words, as to what they thought the world of work looked like in 2040. And I believe about 30 were submitted, and we selected the top 20 to go into the book. And look, these are the men and women shaping the future of work, Jason. These are the heads of the largest staffing firms, CHROs at some of the
Mm.
largest companies, heads of trade associations, the people leading the regulatory environment, heads of the largest labor unions in the world. And they are doing their predictions. Part of the things that I get to do in my spare time is I'm an advisor to the X Prize. And so I borrowed a page from the X Prize and we put up a $10 million prize for whoever is the most correct in their prediction. So in 2040, one of the contributors to this book will receive a $10 million prize funded by me.
And what a prize to receive. And I'm not sure what's more attractive, the $10 million or the fact you got it right.
Yeah, well, look, this is the one area of my life I'll root for inflation, which is currently a trend going on right now. But
Mm.
we will. I will very much look forward to hopefully getting all of them together in 2040. Hopefully, all will be alive and well, and we'll get to see who wins.
And kind of, we've talked a lot about kind of the skill sets that people need to have and so on. But what advice would you give to maybe someone who's young, who's listening to this? Perhaps they're at university and they're
Mhm.
thinking, okay, right, I hear what you're saying, Jeff. Yes, you make very valid points. But how do I identify the skills of the future, and how do I keep up with what skills are that I need to be equipping myself with?
Well, you could sit there and read through the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the World Economic Forum and everyone else that puts out things, or you could go hard. And here's what I mean by that. You either go hard tech or you go hard human. Those are two areas that every single um, government agency, NGO, think tank, when we look at jobs by function, all the different jobs that are going to have unquestionable growth over the next 20 years are either hard tech or hard human. Hard tech, easy enough to understand, right? The STEM
Mm.
jobs, programming and robotics and AI and all those things. I mean, job growth by leaps and bounds. Hard human's a little more difficult to intuit. Hard human are the things that our friends in the robots and AI world are very clear that they are nowhere near being able to do.
Mm.
The human interactions, the empathy, the creativity, the design, the idea that a robot is going to be in your home taking care of somebody is really just laughable. Like that's not going to happen in the next 20 years. And so jobs in healthcare, jobs in sales and marketing, jobs in customer support actually will all grow because people want that interaction.
I've never heard of the term hard human, but I do
I made
totally
it up.
agree with you. Oh, well, I really like it, and I really agree with you. I think that maybe a robot one day will understand empathy, but me personally, I can't see it. If people want to find out more about you, Jeff, for indeed they want to go and buy the book, The End of Jobs, where can they go to?
Well, the easiest place is obviously there's a little online bookseller called Amazon. They stock the book, but I'll tell you this, Jason, I in 1998 bought the domain jeffwald.com and I sat on it for 25 years and I finally put something up just a couple weeks ago, just a couple weeks ago. So you can go to jeffwald.com and see all the information about the book and links to buy it and stuff about the Future of Work Prize and the companies I've invested in the future of work. And so it is a wonderful resource for all things Jeff Wald.
And I'm surprised it's taken you this long to get it off the ground, Jeff.
Oh my God. Yeah, no, I had to formally retire from ADP and finally have some time before I got to
Yeah.
actually building my own website.
It's funny because I've bought my own domain, but the thought of even having time to do it right now, I'm in exactly the same boat. Jeff, it's been a delight. Thank you so much. It's been really interesting, and I'm sure people listening have really enjoyed this half hour.
Thank you so much for having me.
That was Jeff Wald from Manhattan in the US. I'm Jason Connolly. This is the Career Success Podcast. Until next time, goodbye.